Finland joining NATO in a move for more war. Now, this is the exact opposite of the propaganda that our media will feed you, that our media will spray at you constantly. They will say they're joining NATO to stop war, right? They're joining NATO to create peace. NATO is a peace-creating entity. But that is not true at all. NATO is a military entity. NATO creates wars, creates military, creates death and destruction. Just look at Libya, which was the destruction of Libya was led by NATO forces. At the end of the day, you had a country that was one of the most developed and successful countries in Africa turned into literally just battling warlords and open slave markets. And that's NATO. That's NATO. That's all you need to know. Like, you don't need to go through the entire history of NATO. You can give one example, one and done. You can give a one and done example of what NATO is and know that it is no good for anyone. Finland has now joined after basically refusing to join or not being a part of it for years. And Finland shares a border with Russia. So yet again, NATO is pushing closer and closer to Russia's borders. I mean, now they're on Russia's borders. This is a push towards nuclear war. And as I've said before, the U.S. basically runs headlong towards nuclear war, everything we can do to push towards nuclear war, towards nuclear Armageddon. And we hope that Russia and China and some other countries will be the adults in the room and not actually push the button. It's amazing to see this propaganda as they run around acting like this is a peace-seeking move. Finland formally joined NATO on Tuesday, its flag unfurling outside the military bloc's Brussels headquarters in a historic policy shift brought on by Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Finland's accession, ending 7 decades of military non-alignment. Basically, if you want to rephrase that, ending 7 decades of peace, ending 7 decades of not being in a military pact with a military entity that has been involved in war over those past 7 decades. You know what Finland hasn't been involved in the past 7 decades? War. You know what NATO has been involved in? And the U.S., of course? War. So basically, Finland is jumping into a group that regularly is involved in war and leaving their position as a non-warlike people. Like, you can't deny that definition. There's no arguing against that. Even if you wanted to argue NATO's a wonderful thing and we need to stand up to Russia, but you can't argue that NATO hasn't been involved in war over the past 7 decades, but you can argue Finland has. So that sounds like a switch, right? We go from being not involved in war for 7 decades to joining an entity that is regularly involved in war. 7 decades of military non-alignment roughly doubles the length of the border of NATO that NATO shares with Russia and bolsters its eastern flank. Yeah, a lot of propaganda in this Reuters article. As the war in Ukraine grinds on with no resolution in sight. And Russia has said they will respond, that they will have countermeasures. Again, we need to hope that they'll be the adults in the room and not do anything hasty. But so that's Finland. Sweden has requested to join NATO, which would be yet another country that has seen 7 decades of not being involved in war. And this would make them joining. This would be them joining an organization of war and killing. And of course, who gets killed the most in these innocent civilians? I'd say generally get killed the most. I mean, certainly in the U.S. invasions in these wars. Millions of refugees just out of Ukraine, thousands of innocent people killed. And that's what war is. It's horrific. And it's the failure of a species to act evolved, the failure of our species to actually do something that is evolved and sit down and settle these things at a table. It is horrific. The only reason Sweden has not yet joined NATO is because Turkey so far has, well, they kind of fought against it, but then they said they'd do it if they got all kinds of things, all kinds of kind of bribery in order to let Sweden in. And so far that hasn't happened. So for the moment, Turkey continues to stop Sweden from joining. We'll see if that keeps up. But these are not good steps for where the world stands. And of course, your mainstream media will, even if they do cover it, will give you the surface level coverage of this. Finland joining NATO, they're scared of Russia, so they need to stand up to Russia, blah, blah, blah. That's the extent of it.